contractor for the city. Already know me. Today's meeting is this is an expanded planning board ad hoc committee, and we'll introduce all the members as well. This is the housing element and Measure A subcommittee. So that's what that's the charge here, is to take a look at a forum for discussing that. I'll just go around the room and introduce everybody. We have Barbara Kerr sitting at the room, Norman Ezzy Ashcraft, planning board member, Diane Hilberdar, community citizen member. We also have Rebecca Holstam, planning board member, Pat Bale, another citizen member, and Ann Cook, planning board member.
Please speak up.
Speak up. Do you have any amplification? No. No microphone?
I'm sorry, the mic isn't working. Did you hear me introduce everybody?
No.
Okay. Barbara Kerr, Marilyn Ezzy Ashcraft, Diane Kohler-Dark, Rebecca Colstrand, Pat Bale, and Ann Cook. And I'd also like to introduce our facilitator for today. This is David Early of Design, Community, and Environment, and his colleague, Brian Holland. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to David, and then he'll go through the agenda and talk about the meeting format.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, my name is David Early, and I'm a professional planner and facilitator of our offices in Berkeley. Brian Holland is here with me today just to take notes, and we've actually set things up so that we come to conclusions today. We're able to actually project them and print them.
Please speak up.
I know I can barely hear you here, so they can't hear you.
Okay, well, I'm very sorry. I have a cold, and we don't have amplification in this room. I think one thing that people should understand is that the meeting was put together as a committee meeting. Obviously, people are welcome to observe, but we, in this particular room, as I understand it, the microphones are not working, so it's not possible.
Your voice might carry if you stand. If you stand, your voice will carry a bit more.
Any of those come with us over there? I'm going to see if we can get a verbal mic.
You go ahead, I'll do it.
I suggest maybe you move forward. There's an empty seat.
Yeah, there are quite a number of empty seats at the front, so if people would like to be able to hear better, they can move up front. And even further, ma'am, there are seats 3 rows further up on the very front if people want to. Great. So I think we'll just proceed though, and I'm very sorry for the amplification or lack thereof, but and my voice generally carries much better, but I do have a cold. I'm a little at a disadvantage. We put together what I would consider a preliminary agenda, and that's written up on a handout that the committee members have, and it was distributed at the door to people who came in if they wanted to get a copy. We've already had committee introduction. I wanted to do 2 other things, which are to talk about some proposed ground rules and to talk to make sure we're all clear about what the committee's charge is. And then the 4th item that I put on the agenda is to ask all of you to help set an agenda for the remainder of the meeting. We didn't want to presume that we knew exactly how you all would want to proceed. But I did think it very important, and on the back side of the agenda are a set of proposed ground rules and a write-up of what we understand to be your charge. And I'd like to start, if you're okay with that, doing those 2 things. I think that otherwise the committee is probably not going to be exactly clear how we would work together. So if we can, I'll just start in with the ground rules. We wrote up 7 of these rules. We can certainly modify any of them or add to them, but I did write these up. The first is that we are going to be working to achieve consensus. We're not here to take votes. We're not looking for a majority vote, 4 out of 6, 5 out of 6. We're looking for all 6 of you as committee members to come to a consensus on what we want to move forward. Now I want to say, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, consensus does not always mean complete unanimity. We're looking for something that the 6 of you as committee members can all feel good enough about. I think it's reasonable to believe that each of you might come away feeling like you got 70 or 80% or 90% of what you were hoping for, but you may have to give and take a little bit in order to come to a consensus that all of you can support. So when the Quakers or Friends, who are some of the biggest users of consensus in this country, talk about their consensus process, they talk about only blocking consensus if you really feel like you can't move forward. If 5 of the 6 of you are ready to move forward with something and 1 of you has reservations about it, those reservations are very strong, you should definitely say, I just can't live with this, we have to continue to talk about it. But if 5 of the 6 of you are ready to move forward with something and 1 of you is sort of on the fence, it's strictly up to you, but that may be a time when you feel that you can say, I've given this some thought, I'm not 100% in favor of it, but I can live with this and let's go on to the next step. So I just put that out there as a definition of what consensus means.
What's wrong with the vote?
These are proposed ground rules. I'm going to really require at this point where we get consensus, if it's a consensus of all of you that you would like to take majority vote at the end and perhaps send a recommendation to the planning board that's on a 4-6 vote, we can certainly do that. I feel, I mean, I've looked at the background materials, I've heard about the discussions at the planning board, and I've heard about the discussion at the city council. I feel pretty clear that I think what the planning board and council are looking is something that all 6 of you can really endorse and not something that only 4 of you. I see several heads nodding. Barbara?
No, I mean, we know, we were at the council meeting and we, there's a planning board meeting and we hear information secondhand. The reason I object to this is the church consensus is used so loosely so much of the time in my lifetime. Somebody said, well, I heard a couple times I agree with that. And I write it down, okay,
Well, let me, if I can, point to the ground rule number 7 here, at the end, which says that the final recommendations of the committee will be signed by all 6 committee members. So I don't think that if we can get to the end of the ground rules and we agree to all of them, one of them I think will limit the possibility that there'll be a misinterpretation of the final recommendations. Because I will be asking each of the 6 of you to sign the actual document that we write perhaps today or at a future meeting. Once that document is done, we'll be asking for all 6 of your signatures on it, and I don't think there will be any doubt that those are your recommendations going back to the planning board.
so you came in conversing, you're telling us how we think, okay.
I would say do by consensus. I think that one of the things that struck me in the discussion so far, a lot of meetings, is there are so many shared values about what people are talking about. They want to continue doing things about Alameda as we know it, they move here for reasons, or love them, things about it. It seems to me if we can work on trying to identify what those values and things are and help set up a process so we can talk about those, that's really the goal of trying to do a community process. And I'm a planner, so I'm used to trying to reach consensus, and I found that it usually works. You don't feel good about everything, you really don't, but it is, I think, the model that we're trying to ask communities to do as well. I think we should try ourselves.
So we've got Anne suggesting consensus is a good way to operate. Barbara, you still seem uncomfortable with it.
Well, voting is simple, it's, yeah. You don't have to pretend it.
Marilyn, what do you think?
I'd like to give the process a chance. I mean, my suggestion is let's go down the proposed guidelines and see how we feel. I don't think that it's not a matter of we can't turn back and decide to do things differently.
No, absolutely not. Although I think, and I'm suggesting even right now, I think we really do need a consensus to get this committee started. If your consensus is to take votes, we can certainly do that from here on out. But once you agree to consensus at any point, you could by consensus decide we better take a vote.
Yeah, no, I'm favoring consensus too. I think it's totally needed.
I will favor that consensus so long as we can revisit the consensus later on.
We certainly can. Okay. Diane, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd like to try for a consensus too, because I think we're trying to find common ground that we can move ahead on and that we can do that. That's,
I think I'm going to reserve my opinion until I see how the so-called consensus pans out.
Okay, good. All right, so number 2 on the list is emphasizing interest as opposed to position. So those of you who've read the book Getting to Yes, or who know about decision-making processes, that we're all probably familiar with these terms, but let me just explain to you what we mean here. A position is, well, let me start with an interest. An interest is your reason why you feel that something should happen. It's the core values that you're trying to achieve, and Ann already mentioned those at one point. A position is something you might adopt in order, because you see that as a vehicle towards getting to that particular interest. That I was trying to think of an example of what that might mean. I'm sorry, sir, I would like to conduct the meeting if I could, thank you.
Excuse me.
So you might feel, for instance, that it's very important that when we put the forum together, that all sides can be heard equally. And that would be an interest. And I think that's an interest probably that many of us would share, but I certainly don't want to pass judgment on that. But that interest would be, I want to make sure everybody, all sides can be heard equally. You might have a position that the best way to do that is in a town hall format in which there's a point-counterpoint presentation. There are probably other ways to achieve that interest of making sure that everyone can have their opinions heard and that we will be sure to get all sides out. And so I would ask you through this process to try and separate in your own mind, is what I'm asking for, is it my interest, is it my overall goal here, or is this just a vehicle that I've developed, a position in order to get to it? And to let us, to the extent we can, let go of the positions that we might have and really try and focus on our interests. And I would suggest, and I think my experience tells me from facilitating other groups like this, that if we can focus on the interests that we all have and identify those, that generally we'll be more able to come to a consensus about the best way to move forward. We might give or take a little on our positions, but we'll probably be able to get most of our interests fulfilled. Is that something that most of you can agree to? Number 3, we will treat each other with respect. I think that probably goes without a definition of what that means, but some sub-points would be no interrupting, no side conversations, no getting up and leaving the room during the meeting. If we need to have a break, ask for a break, and we'll do that. But speaking respectfully in a low tone of voice and with good manners towards each other. I've been to meetings in my fair city of Berkeley where people use profanity from the dais, and we certainly would want to avoid that as an example. So those are some examples of no food fights. It was a meeting where I had to physically extract 2 people from each other. We wouldn't do that. Those would be examples of things we're trying to avoid. Any questions there?
Well, I'm 70 years old, and sometimes I just have to get up and walk around.
Mm-hmm.
It's the voice circulation, airplane type thing. So don't be insulted if I get up and walk around. Don't get your feelings hurt.
I appreciate your mention. Okay, number 4, the next ground rule is that our discussion is limited to the planning of the forum. We're not here to discuss the merits or the benefits or limitations of Measure A itself. That's something that would presumably happen at the forum. It might happen at other times. But we're here today to plan the forum. We're not here today to discuss Measure A or its merits. Any comment on that? Number 5 is that I'm serving as facilitator at the city's suggestion and invitation. There is not going to be a committee chairperson. We're not going to go through a process of trying to elect a chair or appoint someone that will facilitate, and hopefully we'll get through with this in as short a time as possible and be done. Okay, number 6 is, as I understand it from what I've heard from Kathy and from the council, there will generally be no public input. However, public input can be taken at any point if you agree to it by consent. And then finally,
Yeah, one comment on that is that, I don't know how the rest of the committee feels, but if there is a vote or consensus to have that input, then I think that would be right to be allowed to speak. And also to have it in the meeting, because this meeting is advertised in the paper, for no public input. I feel very strongly about keeping the public informed. And those are the conditions in the
so it sounds like you'd probably today block consensus at public input because of what people understand about this.
Yeah, we don't tell the people one thing and then do something else.
And then the final item, which I've already pointed out, is that the final recommendations of the committee will be signed by all 6 members. And my idea there is that it would eliminate the confusion as Barbara suggested might occur if we type something up and just send it forward. We would like to we actually are set up, as I think I mentioned, that if the time comes, Brian can write something up. We can project it on the screen if it looks good. If he's got a memory stick, he can run over to City Hall, print it out. He's got a signature block set up for all 6 of your signatures, and you could sign even today if we get that far. So we're set to do that by 4 o'clock. Don't worry about it. And if not today, at a future meeting, but the idea being that I just want to let you know that it would be technologically possible to achieve that goal, even today. Okay, do we have a consensus then in favor of these 7 ground rules? Are there any other ground rules that any of you want to add or mention? Okay, well then let's move forward. The next item, before we get to setting the agenda for the rest of the day, is just to make sure we all understand together and that I understand. As Barbara said, I came all the way from Berkeley, so I don't have as much of an understanding of what's happening here as I do. I want to make sure I understand what your charge is here at this meeting. So we've written that up as best we could. My understanding is that your charge is to develop a format for a forum on Measure A that's to include a presentation of facts and history regarding Measure A, discussion of both benefits and limitations, and an opportunity for public input. You're also to develop as part of that a method for recording the results of the forum. That is not of today's meeting, but that part of your planning for the forum is that the forum will have some recording mechanism that will be reported back to the planning board. That's part of what we're going to propose. And that all of your recommendations are going to be forwarded to the planning board for consideration. So whatever we do write up and you sign is something that actually goes to the planning board for further consideration as the way it will move forward. Diane?
The context of the original motion from the council said, I have the opinion that it was the Measure A because the context is both the housing element and transportation. That's correct. I wanted to make sure everybody's clear.
Sorry.
I think we have a microphone.
Is there only one microphone in the building? It's going to be very cumbersome for us to pass it around. That's all you can do.
Yeah, this is all we have.
Well, should that not be included, I think Diane's question
Yeah.
in the outline here, that it should cover not only the discussion of Measure A, but the transportation also. The way it's worded, it just has to do with Measure A, I think
Well, this is an excellent point, and I think to clarify, I'm going to set this down for now. I have a sense that people are hearing a little better. Is that right? But I'm worried if we try to use this microphone and pass it back and forth, the meeting's going to take twice as long.
Yes.
So with your permission in the audience, I'd like to suggest that we not try to use this single microphone.
To follow up on Pam's comment, the motion by Franklin and Richard, he stated twice. The second one is very clear and includes the elements that Diane mentioned. So I would suggest that somewhere in this list is according to the directions given by the institute.
Yeah, and I think we should specify this. I guess the thing I'm a little unclear about is this a forum on Measure A and transportation, or is it a forum on Measure A that addresses the housing element and transportation?
In the context of transportation and the housing element.
Okay, so it is would it be then appropriate to add to that first line? Our charge is to develop a...
Yeah.
Well, I have read the note minutes. I actually have them right here. Yes, I have the minutes from the council motion. And I think it's important that we put it in language that we all understand. The motion said that the context is both the housing element and transportation. I'm honestly not sure what that phrase by itself, without a subject, means. So I'd like to make sure we all have an understanding. I'm going to suggest that we take the first line that I wrote, which says to develop the format for a forum on Measure A, and add right after the word Measure A, comma, looking at both the housing element and, or with respect to both the housing element and transportation, comma, that includes the following points.
Yeah.
Is that your understanding too? Okay, so our charge is to develop a forum on Measure A with respect to both the housing element and transportation. That includes, and then there's a 4 bullet points listed. Otherwise, is this an accurate representation of your charge?
one thing that I think is confusing is it talks about the work of this committee and the work of the forum interchangeably. So I think that the council's direction was to also include a report, a final report of some sort that includes a summary of everything that happened at the workshop, not the forum. This says,
What is, the forum is the workshop, or do you mean this meeting?
well, you have, at the I think what's going to be at the bottom says to develop a method for reporting the results of the forum to the planning board. We're supposed to report the results of this subcommittee to the planning board. We're supposed to report the results of the Measure A workshop to the city council. I presume the planning board too, but the city council.
Okay, so,
I think it's to the community at large,
Right.
actually, which includes
Okay.
all the
Right.
bodies.
so
Right.
should,
Form should be changed.
well, no, I think it's actually the words to the planning board. It should be changed. Your charge is to develop a method for reporting the results. This is not the forum today. The
Right.
forum is the thing you're planning.
That's the point, in our charter, the planning board and the council is that we report the results of this back to the planning board.
And, this
But
is
the
a-
results of the forum,
Yes.
of the council.
Okay, so the line that's not in italics, it sounds like should say that your charge is to develop a method for reporting the results of the forum to the city council.
Because it goes first to the planning board.
No, that's on the bottom, it says not line. The last line says the planning
Ad hoc
board.
committee goes to the planning.
Then that's the last line.
That's the last
This,
line.
this committee, when I said the committee, that means the ad hoc committee, maybe we should add that. This ad hoc committee. Okay, so I'm changing my last line in italics to say that this ad hoc committee's recommendation will be forwarded to the planning board for consideration. That's what we're doing here today, possibly future days. We're forwarding our recommendations to the planning board.
The second to last line should read to the city council.
Yes. Okay.
Good point.
I just wanted to have one question just about that. One of the issues within the context of the housing and transportation element, I mean, one of the big factors has to do with historic preservation. I just want to understand if there's a common understanding that that can be discussed within the context of the housing element, the issues related to
Part of it,
Yeah.
part of the housing.
Okay.
Is
I
discussion.
mean, yeah, I mean, it's, discussions on the concept of housing element, I don't know what else you can, I mean, the housing element allows you, is a kitchen sink. I mean,
Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody agrees with that.
I was thinking of that too, and kind of my own feedback to this meeting, could we, I was trying to figure out if there's a way to weave everything I've heard over the last year that the community wants to talk about into those two elements. It seems like there probably is.
And housing element covers all of that. It
Yeah,
covers
yeah,
historic
I agree.
preservation, it covers transportation, it covers everything. So
I think that is
we're talking about the housing element only, then you would not have a problem discussing any of those issues that have been brought up historically for years.
Okay, so let me just reread where we are, and I think then we can finish with this item. So our charge, your charge, is to develop the format for a forum on Measure A, and I've added with respect to both the housing element and transportation. That includes a presentation of facts and history regarding Measure A, discussion of Measure A benefits, discussion of Measure A limitations, and public input. Your charge continues to develop a method for reporting the results of the forum to the city council. And then we add down here in italics that this ad hoc committee's recommendations will be forwarded to the planning board for consideration. Agreement there? Okay, we've successfully done 3 agenda items. We're moving along here. Okay, so the next question then to ask of all of you is how would you like to proceed for the remainder of your work?
Well, I'll throw another idea. Shorten the meeting, terribly, but, it would simply be, given the committee chair, there are 3 people on the committee who are strongly in favor of Measure A. You see the benefits of Measure A and like to discuss those. And 3 people, I would see the limitations of Measure A. And we could divide up the workshop either in time or number of speakers, and the 3 anti-Measure A people could pick speakers and
you have an idea of a way that the forum could be structured. And one idea, if I move forward today, I'm going to actually turn it into two ideas. One idea would be to start with your idea and work from it and see if people can support it as they maybe change it a little and work from it. A second idea would be to use that as one starting point and press brainstorm several other formats and then choose among them. But you've suggested a format. I guess I would say, and it's certainly, I don't know all of you, I'm not sure that people at this table are all ready to be labeled, for lack of a better word, as pro or anti-Measure A. But I think there's a possibility. I think your idea is that in some way, someone could be asked to create one panel of people who are pro-Measure A and one panel of people who see possibilities or have a desire to at least consider making changes to Measure A. Ask those two sets of people to make presentations, and then to follow that up, I presume, with some sort of public input session.
Well,
And that
with an addition person, however, which is the person who did
the history piece.
and the education portion.
So that's a model that we could follow. So I guess before we talk about that model any further, I guess I'd like to ask, is it useful to begin with a model? Would you like to talk about several models? Is that the right place to start? Rebecca?
So I'd like to throw out an alternative approach. It seems like one is that I think everybody, quality of life in Alameda, and we had different visions about how it seems to be that it's ourselves and under space. What was it trying to do? What were, because there was a variable, how has it been implemented? We're going to discuss that.
Do that
No.
in order to plan the form, or are you saying that?
The history course we do.
And I know it's been happening in the community and it's been happening today. And I find that to be, we need to understand Measure A, to have an open discussion based, that's, we so quickly from the community in my years on Alameda, while we've got being, is to discuss those things.
And then we'll come to you.
Okay.
And with the actual form statements that people have made, get on to what it is that the charge.
But could be a format, the point I think you might have been making, clearly stated who they are and what they are. My experience as a facilitator is that's, I mean, I'm not one of her interests, which is,
I'm just saying that we've agreed to something.
agreed is that we need to come up with a full about one way, which Barb.
Come out of the form or see that there are just two sides. If there's any modification, at the very least, as it is that Measure A should contain community education and of course, but how it relates to
Those who are interested.
And I'm paraphrasing, but talked about bringing in experts. I think you might have even said outside experts. I think you interpreted that to mean paid consultants.
Absolutely.
I'm
because
wondering,
that's been
Marilyn, can
proposed.
you clarify, is your idea that the forum should feature a series of paid consultants?
Well, I don't know that they have to be paid, but if we can get, there are a number of people, authors, urban planners, people in the Bay Area, outside the Bay Area that may have something interesting to add to this discussion.
So your idea, as I'm understanding it, wouldn't necessarily be to hire a series of consultants, but might be to invite others who don't have a dog in this fight, to use the term that Pat said, to present some other points of view just to get people's thoughts going. Is that right?
Should call him Rebecca.
Can we go back to the first MTCWRP form, which is where the credibility of this approach was completely blown up. The WRP and MTC grant did not limit the first planning session to non-Measure A compliant planning. But what it turned out to be was one first member of the planning board stood up and said we should all be good friends and talk about changing Measure A. Then one of the staff members stood up and made some completely untrue comments about the viability of the gondola and the viability of the ferry, moving the ferry. The third thing is it was based on the PDC. Supposedly the PDC was very clearly said it was a concept and not a plan.
understood you right, I don't want to repeat it, but
Okay.
it was not an appropriate
When I
word for a
wasn't
meeting like
referring,
this.
okay. I can't express too strongly the low opinion I have of consultants, because after 8 years on the city council, I walked in lobbying before I watched them come in, and they knew who hired them, and I think who hired them with staff. And they were after the next contract. And I just watched in horror as the Blue Windup boys came in and made their so-called professional orientation.
Okay, so I
just meet one or two, and I just counsel that especially they've done some more honorable, but most of them were not. And those are facts. I don't like it, because I really am in favor of good government, and I was just, that was one of the things I was horrified by. And the WRT presentation was Exhibit A. We looked at it, we were told one thing, that this was going to be alternatives plural in housing for Illinois Point. And it was all based on a mythical movement of the ferry system, which, having sat through 8 years of budget hearings on the ferries, and I know how thin they are, the idea that they could support a ferry by itself out there is, and eliminate the estuary ferry is just not a reasonable thing. So, the idea that some people who don't know the city as well as we do are going to come in and tell us what we should be thinking, as happened at that WRT forum. We just have these very recent examples, March 29th, why that is not a valid thing. And that is one of the things that sent the pro-Measure A people in court. And that is one of the things that caused the appeal.
You've spoken for a while now, I'd like to try and bring us back to the question at hand, and the broader,
I was addressing the question at hand. Should we hire an outside consultant to come in and run?
Well, no, but we actually, I've asked twice the question, how do we want to move forward with our meetings? And I don't think we've really answered that.
Well, I
You've
made a
made,
proposal that
yes.
you refused to discuss.
No, I have not refused to discuss it. I've tried to ask the other members if they'd like to discuss it, and I actually haven't heard an answer. We heard a proposal from you. I think we could almost say we heard a second proposal from Marilyn, perhaps not as well articulated. I would suggest that there are 1.5 to 2 proposals for a quorum format on the floor. And I'm not clear if you would like to, I can write the 2 proposals up on the board, and then we can work from one or both of them. But I'm not clear if you would like to begin with one of the 2 ideas that have been somewhat articulated
I
here,
think they're
or from
mushed
another.
together. I think it was the same idea, just Marilyn's approach is that we have other people do it, experts.
Okay,
I
well,
think
so let me try and find some points of consensus here, if that's what you're saying, Pat. It sounds like you at least think, and maybe others agree, that there's a general consensus then that there should be, that the forum would include some set of presentations, which may be pro-con, they may be fact-based, some of you say they might include some outside folks, some of you say it should only be people from Alameda, but there would be some set of presentation followed by, I'm assuming, a set of public testimony given one person after another. I had some thoughts that Ann was making comments that maybe she was not comfortable with that, but maybe I'm hearing, I think, Pat, you're suggesting there's actually consensus in favor of that overall format, and we would want to move forward from there.
I guess I didn't make myself clear at all then, because I'm looking more for an information-based presentation rather than setting up this dynamic of the pros and cons. I think whether it's, it's people from the citizens of Alameda making those presentations or a consultant coming in, I think it's still setting the dynamic of saying, okay, we're on this side and we're on this side. I'd like to get a broader basis of information out to the public. I believe that's part of what at least many people are asking for. I don't think everyone's asking for
So
that.
you're just saying an educational forum more than
Well,
anything.
I think at least as starters, that's where we need to begin, to get a common
So you're
knowledge.
saying
So
there would be more than
history
one
is-
form?
Well, I don't know that. History, I think probably everybody agrees that history is the place we need to start. And then we need to understand, once Measure A was adopted, how did we actually begin to implement it? How does it relate to the zoning code, that sort of thing? How has it been incorporated into all the policies that we as a city have? That's kind of my feeling about where we need to begin, rather than immediately jumping into camps and saying, I'm here and I'm there. I think that's
Well,
more
that wasn't my
productive.
suggestion. My suggestion was that the planning board members take speakers, or maybe a lot of time, to have, and if you want to bring in professional experts, that would be okay with me. I would not dream of telling you who to pick. But I think we have a right to bring in speakers that we wish to hear.
If that's the route we go, if we decide that we want speakers kind of representing both sides, I would agree with you. I'm not quite there yet, I guess.
So I want to underline something, or surface something that I think may be underlying this in terms of interest. I think what I just heard from Rebecca was a sort of broad, and if I can use the word objective, history and explanation of Measure A and how it's worked. I'm guessing, although I'm not sure I've heard any of you say this, that Barbara, you and others, you might be concerned that you're not sure that this thing called objective would be objective in your opinion.
Of course not.
And so you're looking for a method. Well, I think it's important to say this, because I don't think anybody said it. I think what you're saying is that you're concerned that if you were told there's going to be a single, whether it's one speaker, two, or three set of objective speakers about Measure A, its history and the facts related to it, you have a concern that those speakers, if chosen by city staff or the planning board, to name two possible ways to choose them, might not present what you think is an objective set of
I
facts.
know you will.
Okay. Well, I think it's important to make that point. So,
See, I have no objection to Rebecca's suggestion, Anne's suggestion, Marilyn's suggestion, that they want to bring in quote professional speakers for their allotted time. I think that's great, and I think we should be allowed to bring in speakers, professional or otherwise, for the other half of the allotted time. And what's being also ignored in this is the public input. If there's one thing we need out of this forum, it's the public input. And I think they should be allowed to submit their opinions in writing as well. That bothers me that that's being kind of splattered over, because I think we the people are the most important part of it. So I'm not telling the others, the three planning board members, who to pick, what to say. Go
if
for
I
it.
could, and I know you got your hand, but I do want to ask a follow-up question here. I've heard the name Woody Minor bandied about as someone who might make a factual presentation.
He's a story.
And I know
He's a
Woody.
history person.
Yeah. But would there be agreement among the six of you, and maybe Woody's an aberration, but is he someone that all six of you would agree could give a historical overview of Measure A that would be objective? Or would he be on one side or the other?
No, I see it, and it's factual.
I have no objection. I mean, I've never seen it. I don't know if I've met him, but I have, yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of good things about him, so I have no objection.
Because I guess I'm trying to look for two things here. One thing I'm saying is that maybe it's not a fact that it would be impossible to find presenters who all sides could agree could present objective facts. Woody seems like an example of
The
someone.
history of it, I think that's out.
And so then, Rebecca asked for both history and how it's being implemented and how it relates to zoning and other city policies. Yeah, so, and I don't know, is that something that either Woody could also do? Or
No.
No, okay. Is that something that could be presented objectively by one person, or is that where the opinions start to
That's
diverge?
both sides.
So that has sides in your opinion?
Yeah, what's wrong with presenting different sides?
Well, I think I'm just saying for myself, but I can imagine that there's a set of objective facts about how Measure A is implemented in the zoning code.
It's in the housing element. It's in the housing element. how it was applied, how it's worked, what it's done, what the restraints were, what the protections it afforded, and what the benefits were. It's all there already. So if you wanna, hire somebody to go through the housing element and draw the chart or whatever and say, this is what the good things are and these are the bad things over here, fine. Because I hear what Rebecca is saying, and she's actually correct, in that there are many people who don't even know what a housing element is. So if we're talking about an educational process, then in fact you have to not only cover the history of Measure A, you have to cover the fact of what the history of the housing element itself is, as well as the general plan, as well as the ordinances and how those have been modified. Well, that's something in essentially staff could do. If the people sitting around this table had enough, what's the word I'm looking for? Yes, confidence that it would be done in a fair, even-handed way. That has not been our experience in the past with city staff. So if you want to put out there on the table, putting it out on the table is part of the city staff is driving the train to eliminate Measure A. We all know it's sitting at this table, it's not a secret. So if you assign someone new or someone different, hey, I wouldn't have a problem with that. It would go through what the city itself produced and draw up all of these things that Rebecca is interested in and a lot of the community is interested in. They don't understand it, and I agree with her. There has to be an educational element to that, but we have to have confidence that it's done in a fair, even-handed way, and I don't have that confidence, quite frankly.
Yeah, because they would be hiring a person to do this.
I will, Ann had her end up with this record.
Yeah, so in thinking about this on my own, and one of the things that I think I think it's simpler when we're talking about the history and the actuality of Measure A. It's more complicated and difficult to determine what the form to do. We're talking about what are the effects, both negative and positive. Now, in terms of what is Measure A, I thought I could just maybe share what my thoughts were and see if I'm really off base. But I think that is something that can be done by any number of people in Alameda. I think that it has to do with what the ballot measure was itself, including the pros and cons statements in the ballot measure itself. There's certainly newspaper archives talking about what people thought about it at the time, including our elected officials and all. And then there's a question then what led up to the council action in 1991, which was council action, not a ballot measure, which I don't even know what led up to that. I would like to know.
That's the Red Brick Building.
I think, see, I don't even know what that means. I think people want to know what that means.
The Red Brick Building, she's talking about.
Oh, well, that was a measuring issue, but
That was in 91, that's what she's talking about.
So then there's the 91, and then what were the effects of this action? Then there were some legal challenges, or at least one legal challenge in the settlement agreement about Measure A, which has also become now part of our policy by default. The settlement agreement becomes what's governing now some housing in Alameda. And then how these, three, or maybe there's more, I don't know, events have then become part of our general plan policy, our transportation element, our housing element, and or our zoning ordinance, how they interrelate or are included in those. And then maybe finalize with specific examples of what that body of Measure A history allows and disallows in Alameda. Because I think that one thing that I have heard in the planning board at different times is people standing up and saying, Measure A doesn't allow this, when in fact it does, or Measure A allows this when in fact it doesn't. So I think that there's actually how it's applied can sometimes be very confusing. And so to me, that's a fairly, objective history that people can put together and comment upon, and maybe someone will say, oh, well, I saw this newspaper article that says something different. But it's not, it's not where we, it's where Alameda is the expert. The office here for Alameda and the time all this happened. The city attorney is the expert on it. The planning staff that does codes and everything, and the people that work on the committees are the experts on it. And that seems to me, something that shouldn't be so hard for us to.
And what I heard several things, I don't know how much of this is in Woody's presentation, but that Woody has a presentation put together that at least talks about the original measure and the ballot arguments, and I would imagine if it takes any longitudinal look at all, it must look at the council action in 1991 as well.
Yes, it does. Oh, yeah, I think it does. I think it does, yeah. I think it talks about the Red Brick Building. Oh, now,
What is the
The red brick building was a structure at Marina Village that was an original industrial site. And the developer wanted to put condominiums in the red brick building and not tear the structure down, leave the shell of the building and,
Total law.
right. His threat was that if he was not allowed to do that, because he would not be allowed under Measure A to tear the building down. And it was put on the ballot whether people wanted the building torn down or they wanted it revamped into condominiums. And it lost an overwhelming. It was voted to tear the building down, which in fact is what they did. And built compliant, Measure A compliant development at Marina Village.
So that's in addition to the council action committee, when it's another ballot measure
Yeah.
that other people need to know about.
Well, you,
That was it.
and you've said there was a council action, but it sounds like Pat and Barbara are saying there wasn't a council action, maybe there was a council action to put it on the ballot. That was all.
Yeah.